Did you know that a simple phrase from George Russell almost drove Max Verstappen crazy? What seemed like a joke ended up unleashing one of the most intense psychological wars in modern Formula One. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think Russell crossed the line with his provocations? What's really behind this rivalry that's shaking Red Bull and the entire paddock? In this video, I'm going to tell you how the tension between George Russell and Max Verstappen exploded at the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix, and how this could change the future of Formula One. To understand what's happening between Max Verstappen and George Russell, it's essential to go back a little in this season and see how this rivalry began. The tension between these two drivers didn't appear overnight. In fact, it's the result of several accumulated clashes that escalated race after race. The most obvious breaking point came at the Spanish Grand Prix. There, Max Verstappen was involved in an incident that completely changed the season. During the race, Verstappen was penalized 10 seconds and, most critically, received 3 penalty points on his license. This punishment left him dangerously close to an automatic suspension. Today, Max is just 1 point away from being forced to miss a race. For a driver fighting for the championship, this is a critical scenario. What for many was just a racing accident, for others was the spark that ignited a psychological war. From that moment on, Verstappen's every move, every aggressive maneuver, and every word in the press conferences has been under a microscope. Stewards, the press, and above all his rivals, began to scrutinize him. And George Russell quickly understood that he could take advantage of this additional pressure on Max. Verstappen, a 4-time world champion, has always been known for his mental toughness. However, the FIA's penalty point system put him in an unprecedented situation. Every risky maneuver could be his last before a suspension. Every aggressive overtaking move now carries much greater weight. And this is where the story gets interesting. Because while Max is forced to race carefully, George Russell identified a unique opportunity. Russell has not only proven to be fast on the track, but has also begun to play off it. Verstappen's situation is a weak point, and Russell has decided to exploit it with a strategy that goes beyond the steering wheel: mental warfare. What began as a battle of pure talent on the track has become a game of pressure, innuendo, and hidden messages in every interview. The difference now lies not only in speed, but in who can best handle the emotional burden this rivalry brings. The current context is very clear. Verstappen isn't just racing against his rivals. He's racing against the regulations, against the accumulation of penalties, and against a possible suspension that could jeopardize his entire championship. At the same time, Russell is racing with greater freedom. He has more room to be aggressive, to take risks, and most importantly, to continue pushing his opponents psychologically. This delicate balance between regulatory pressure and emotional pressure is what's turning this rivalry into one of the most tense in recent years. It's not just about who has the best car or who qualifies best on Saturdays. Now it's about who can hold out the longest without breaking down mentally. The entire paddock is watching his every move. Team principals, journalists, and even the stewards know that what's happening between Verstappen and Russell goes beyond the sporting aspect. A silent game is being waged where every word, every break, and every maneuver can make a difference. And this is just the beginning. Because as the season progresses, the tension will only continue to rise. In Formula One, words carry as much weight as tires, and George Russell knows this perfectly well. What began as a purely on-track competition gradually transformed into a psychological war where every public statement could destabilize his rival. Russell knew how to read the moment precisely. He didn't just see Verstappen under pressure due to his penalty points. He also saw an opportunity to force him into making mistakes without having to touch him on the track. Everything exploded during the press conference after qualifying for the Canadian Grand Prix. There, Russell took pole position ahead of Verstappen. But what really captured the world's attention wasn't his fastest lap, but what he said afterward. With a seemingly harmless smile, he uttered a phrase that changed everything. "We're friends. Everything's fine. I've got a few more points on my license to play." That phrase was anything but casual. Russell was sending a calculated message straight to Verstappen's mind. The most important thing here isn't just what he said, but the timing of it. Russell knew Verstappen was just 1 point away from a suspension. The whole paddock knew it. That line wasn't a passing comment. It was a provocation disguised as humor. It was like saying, I can be aggressive, I have room, you don't. The move was clear. Russell wanted to put the pressure on Max. He wanted Max to know that while he could race at the limit, Verstappen was caught on a fine line between control and a penalty. But this wasn't a one-off. It wasn't just a random comment. Russell had been laying the groundwork for a while. In previous interviews, he had openly stated that a suspension for Verstappen wouldn't be unfair. And he went further. He even said that, if you continue driving recklessly, you will accumulate points and be punished. This wasn't just an opinion. It was a frontal attack, a strategy to increase the pressure on Max at every corner, with every overtake, with every braking. Russell even downplayed the consequences of a suspension, saying that missing a race wouldn't be the end of the world. That seemingly relaxed comment was actually a carefully measured provocation. What he was doing was downplaying the severity of what could be a disaster for Verstappen. Russell was making it clear that, for him, it was all part of the game. He was pushing the limits, but above all, he was messing with his rival's head. These statements were interpreted by many as the official start of the mental war. Russell wasn't speaking to the public. He wasn't speaking to journalists. He was speaking directly to Verstappen. And Max knew it. He felt it. Because when you're on the verge of a penalty, any comment, any insinuation, haunts you. It settles in your head and begins to change the way you view every move on the track. The power of these provocations isn't in what they literally say. It's in what they provoke in the other driver's subconscious. Russell knew that Verstappen is aggressive by nature, that Max doesn't know how to race halfway. And now, with the points against him, Russell was forcing him to question every move. He was pushing him toward doubt, toward indecision. And in Formula One, a driver who hesitates, even for a fraction of a second, is losing. Russell's strategy was as clever as it was risky. If he managed to get Verstappen conditioned, he could control him from off the track. But if Verstappen responded even more aggressively, the danger of an escalation was real. It was a double-edged sword. But in Canada, everything indicated that Russell had achieved what he was looking for: to make Max feel the pressure, not only from the FIA, but from his own rivals as well. This series of public provocations began to become the central theme of the paddock. It was no longer just about lap times. Now the focus was on who would win the psychological battle. And in Formula One, that battle can be as decisive as pit strategy. What Russell had sown in his statements was beginning to bear fruit. And the most worrying thing for Verstappen was that, from that moment on, everything he said or did would be interpreted through the filter of this mental war. Every response would be seen as a sign of strength or weakness. Every reaction would be measured to the millimeter. The provocation had already been launched. The pressure had already been set. And Verstappen, for the first time in a long time, was racing with an extra weight on his shoulders. George Russell's provocations didn't fall on deaf ears. Max Verstappen, a driver accustomed to handling pressure on the world's most demanding tracks, this time displayed something rarely seen from him: an immediate, emotional, and unfiltered reaction. What happened during the post-qualifying press conference at the Canadian Grand Prix made it clear that Russell had managed to touch a point that Verstappen wasn't willing to tolerate. When journalists persisted in asking him about his penalty point situation, Verstappen exploded. It wasn't a calculated response or a graceful exit. It was a genuine outburst. With a frown, he responded curtly and directly, "I don't need to hear it again. I'm really getting fed up with this." His tone of voice left no room for interpretation. He was annoyed, visibly tired of this issue becoming the center of attention every weekend. The most shocking thing wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. His body language betrayed what his words were trying to control. He was uncomfortable, irritated, and for the first time in a long time, completely off his usual level. These kinds of reactions aren't typical for Verstappen. Max usually appears unfazed, even defiant, in the face of media pressure. But on this occasion, he failed to maintain control. His response not only abruptly ended the conversation, but also made it clear that the topic was affecting him more than he cared to admit. It wasn't simply annoyance at the repeated questions. It was mental exhaustion from feeling like he was running with a countdown clock hanging over his head, where any mistake could mean a suspension. Sports psychology experts were quick to analyze the situation. Verstappen's body language was described as a clear sign that Russell had managed to unsettle him. This wasn't superficial annoyance. It was a direct blow to his inner confidence. What weighs most on a driver like Max isn't criticism. It's feeling that his rivals have discovered his greatest weakness and are publicly exploiting it. The frustration he displayed in Canada wasn't just with journalists. It was with himself, with the situation, and probably with the discomfort of knowing he was falling into exactly the trap Russell had set. But this didn't end in the press room. Throughout the weekend, Verstappen's tension was evident. On the radio with his team, every message carried a more impatient tone than usual. Every maneuver on the track seemed executed with the intention of leaving no room for error. The pressure was visible. Red Bull boss Christian Horner quickly came to his defense publicly, assuring him that Max had been impeccable, but internally, it was clear that the team knew their driver was racing with a much higher level of stress than usual. The thing is, Verstappen isn't a driver who feels comfortable racing on his own. His style has always been aggressive, direct, and uncompromising. But now, with 11 points on his license, Max was forced to drive with a degree of caution that wasn't in keeping with his nature. That discomfort was reflected in his gestures, his responses, and above all, in the way he handled every situation with Russell on the track. The most interesting thing is that, although Verstappen didn't make any serious mistakes in Canada, every time he had to interact with Russell on the track, the tension was palpable. Max seemed focused not only on gaining position, but also on making sure he didn't fall into any trap that could earn him another penalty point. Russell's strategy was working. He had created doubt, forced Verstappen to overthink, and in Formula One, when a driver starts overcalculating in situations they normally resolve with instinct, they lose a small but crucial advantage. What this situation demonstrates is that in modern Formula One, not everything is decided by the clock. Words, gestures, and psychological strategies also define championships. And this time, for the first time in a long time, Max Verstappen showed that even the strongest can be overtaken by provocations if they are well executed and timed just right. Verstappen's reaction in Canada wasn't just an emotional response. It confirmed that Russell had gotten inside his head. And now the question is, how will Verstappen respond in the upcoming races? Will he be able to regain control of the situation, or will he remain trapped in the mind game Russell started? The Canadian Grand Prix wasn't just marked by the words spoken off the track. What happened on the circuit was even more revealing. It was there that the tension turned into risky maneuvers, strategies calculated to the limit, and a direct confrontation that nearly led to much more serious consequences. Because psychological wars may begin with statements, but they always end up being decided on the track. The most critical situation arose during the final laps of the race, when a safety car completely changed the scenario. It was the perfect moment for the pressure built up throughout the weekend to explode. Max Verstappen and George Russell were side by side, carrying everything they had been carrying over from the previous weeks. It was no longer just a fight for position. It was a battle of egos, of limits, of who would give in first. Neither wanted to be the one to show weakness. Under those conditions, any detail could become an opportunity to destabilize the rival. And that's exactly what happened. While following the safety car, Russell made a move that sparked controversy. On the back straight, just before the chicane, Russell braked abruptly. It wasn't a normal braking move. It was sudden, surprising, as if he was trying to provoke an immediate reaction from Verstappen. And he succeeded. Max, surprised by Russell's unexpected deceleration, momentarily overtook him on the right. This move was illegal under the safety car conditions. Verstappen, aware of this, quickly reversed and regained the position, but the situation was already completely out of control. Both teams knew what was at stake and were quick to contact race control to report what had just happened. The team radios at the time are absolutely revealing. Max, tense and visibly upset, said to his engineer, "The safety car is going very slowly, what is it doing?" And then added with frustration, "George suddenly braked aggressively." From the other side, Russell immediately reported, "Verstappen overtook me under the safety car." Each driver was trying to position themselves as the victim, as if the other had crossed the line. The battle was no longer just about speed. It was a struggle to control the narrative with the stewards. Every word on the radio, every report, was carefully thought out to influence the potential regulatory decision. It was a game on two levels, on the track and in the FIA offices, and both drivers knew it. Red Bull wasted no time. They lodged two formal protests against Russell. The first, for erratic driving behind the safety car. According to Red Bull, Russell had braked unnecessarily and dangerously, violating the article that prohibits dangerous or inconsistent movements in these situations. The second protest targeted the excessive distance Russell maintained from the safety car. Under the rules, drivers cannot be too far behind the safety car, and Red Bull claimed Russell had exceeded that limit by a considerable margin. Red Bull boss Christian Horner was particularly blunt on the matter. Horner stated that Russell had deliberately braked while constantly checking his mirrors, seeking to inconvenience Verstappen. He added that the distance Russell maintained behind the safety car was unacceptable, 3 times greater than permitted. From Red Bull's perspective, everything pointed to Russell playing dirty, pushing the rules to the limit to provoke Verstappen and force him into a mistake that would put him out of the race, or, worse, bring him closer to the final point of suspension. Mercedes, for its part, staunchly defended Russell. For them, everything George had done was within the rules. The braking was legal, the distances were within tolerable limits, and Red Bull's reaction was nothing more than a desperate maneuver to change the result in the office, given that they had failed to overtake him on the track. Mercedes boss Toto Wolff called Red Bull's protests unnecessary, petty, and a waste of time. For Wolff, what had happened was simply part of the game. Winning and losing should be settled on the track, not in the FIA offices. The reality is that the technical analysis left everyone with the feeling that Russell had played on the edge of the rules. The maneuvers weren't blatantly illegal, but they were questionable from a sporting perspective. The FIA, after reviewing the data and cameras, rejected Red Bull's protests. Officially, Russell didn't break any rules, but in the paddock, the debate was far from over. The steward's decision confirmed that Russell had found a gray area within the regulations and exploited it with complete skill. What seemed like a risky maneuver turned out to be a perfectly valid strategy. The most dangerous thing about these types of moves is that they begin to create a precedent. If Russell manages to take psychological and regulatory advantage from these types of situations, other drivers could begin to use similar tactics. This doesn't just affect Verstappen. It could transform the way Formula One races are played. Aggression would cease to be just a matter of on-track overtaking and become a constant manipulation of the gray areas of the regulations. What seemed like a simple exchange of words between George Russell and Max Verstappen has escalated to a level no one expected. Russell used the rules, the conference calls, and every opportunity to pressure Max in an intelligent and calculated way. Verstappen, known for his mental toughness, finally showed clear signs of discomfort. On the track, Russell pushed the strategy to the limit with maneuvers that, although legal, were designed to destabilize. The safety car incident in Canada demonstrated that this rivalry is no longer just a sporting one. It's a psychological battle that is affecting the decisions and performance of both drivers. From this point on, each race will be a new episode in this mental war. The championship is no longer defined solely by who has the fastest car. Now it's about who can withstand the psychological pressure. Max Verstappen's future is determined. Every maneuver and every word will be analyzed in detail. All eyes are on what he will do in the upcoming races, and any mistake could cost him dearly. Russell, for his part, has proven he knows how to play the game on and off the track. And he's probably not done yet. Tell me what you think in the comments. Do you think Verstappen can regain control? Or that Russell will continue to gain ground in this mental war? And if you want to continue receiving these kinds of exclusive analyses, subscribe so you don't miss out on what's coming next.